I don't want toys. I want a dad. Those words hit like a thunderclap in the middle of a bustling children's exhibition, leaving Sebastian Miller frozen in shock. Who could have guessed that one small sentence would set the stage for an unexpected journey of loss, redemption, and hope? Now imagine being in his shoes, an ultra-successful CEO with everything but a family, faced with a child's raw, unfiltered pain. What would you do? Stick around to find out how this moment sparks a series of events that lead to the creation of a foundation for kids who've lost parents in a life-changing mission of justice. But before we dive into the heart of the story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let us know where you're tuning in from. Could you predict where this journey is headed? Share your thoughts and join the conversation. Sebastian Miller stood amidst the chaos of the children's exhibition, the hum of excited voices and the scent of popcorn filling the air. His sharp blue eyes scanned the crowd, the face of a man accustomed to power and control. A billionaire CEO, tall with golden blonde hair that shimmered under the lights, he exuded confidence and wealth. Everything people admired but few could truly understand. It was supposed to be just another event, a token gesture for the community, one of those charity appearances that businessmen like him made. But something in the air was different today. It was a noise, a stillness that cut through the laughter. A little girl standing near the interactive exhibits caught his attention. She was alone. Her gaze was steady, watching the other children play with a quiet intensity that seemed out of place in a room so full of life. He couldn't help but notice her. Perhaps it was the calmness that radiated from her, an old soul trapped in a child's body, a stillness that contrasted sharply with the lively chaos around her. Sebastian's feet moved before his mind had fully processed the thought. His hand reached for one of the plush teddy bears that were being offered at a nearby booth. The bear was a caramel brown, soft to the touch with a bright red ribbon tied around its neck. He had seen the other children rushing to pick up the toys, their faces lighting up with smiles as they received their prizes. Surely a simple gift like this would bring a smile to her face as well. It was what they all wanted, wasn't it? A little token, a piece of warmth in the cold world they lived in. He knelt down before her, holding the teddy bear out and offering. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said, his voice warm, carrying the same practiced charm he used in boardrooms and meetings. "Would you like a teddy bear?" The girl's eyes, dark and large, met his with a calm that unsettled him. She didn't flinch, didn't reach out, didn't even seem to register the typical joy children displayed at the sight of a gift. Instead, she simply looked up at him and said, "Sir, I don't want toys, I want a dad." Her voice was gentle, yet it felt like a thunderclap that echoed louder than any of the surrounding noise. Sebastian blinked, the words hanging in the air, their weight pressing down on him in a way he hadn't anticipated. What did she just say? He straightened, a slight frown furrowing his brow as he processed her words, trying to make sense of them. "What did you say, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice softer now, less confident, a rare vulnerability creeping in. The girl's gaze never wavered as she spoke again, her voice steady and clear, as if she had said these words 1,000 times before. "I don't have a dad," she said, her eyes not leaving his. "He died 2 years ago at work. Mama says it was an accident, but she cried for a long time after." Sebastian's hand, still holding the teddy bear, slowly lowered. The words hit him like a punch to the stomach, a wave of empathy crashing over him in that instant. For a brief moment, the noise of the room, the laughter, and the chatter around him all faded away, as if the world had suddenly grown mute. He could hear only the soft echo of the girl's words. He had grown up without a father. His own father had walked out when he was young, leaving him to grow up in a world of uncertainty. He knew that feeling, the hollow emptiness of losing someone you loved. But this little girl, with her quiet grace and solemn eyes, seemed to carry that loss in a way that spoke of deep, unhealed wounds. His throat tightened as he looked at her, searching for something to say, something to fill the silence that had descended between them. But words failed him. The girl, Anna, as she had introduced herself, wasn't asking for pity, wasn't looking for sympathy. She was simply stating a fact, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. She had no father, and in that moment, Sebastian felt a deep, personal ache in his chest. He had everything. wealth, power, success, but he knew the emptiness of growing up without the love and security of a father. And yet, here she was, so composed, so steady in her grief, it almost crushed him. "Anna," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm sorry you lost your dad." She nodded, her expression calm, as if she had learned to accept the pain long ago. "Thank you," she replied, her voice quiet but sincere. Sebastian stood there for a long moment, his heart heavy as he studied her. There was something about her, something beyond her words that pulled at him. He had seen children break down over far lesser things. But Anna was different. Her calmness in the face of such tragedy unsettled him, made him feel as if he had stepped into a world of raw, untold sorrow that he was somehow not meant to see. "What's your mama's name?" he asked, his voice quieter now, as he tried to shift the focus away from the weight of the moment. Anna blinked, her gaze softening slightly, though it remained sharp. "Tanya," she said simply. "She's the best mama." Her words were filled with a pride that made Sebastian smile faintly. "I think your mama might be right," he said, his voice breaking through the quiet. He crouched down to her level, trying to understand, trying to find a way to connect with her. She was so much older than her years, so far removed from the carefree innocence that children her age usually carried. As the crowd around them continued to bustle, their voices rising and falling in waves, Sebastian was lost in thought. His mind raced, piecing together the fragments of his own broken childhood with the quiet pain this young girl carried. He was about to speak again when the sound of hurried footsteps broke his reverie. A woman, tall and graceful, rushed toward them, her face flushed with concern. She was dressed in a blue denim jacket and a long flowing skirt, her dark hair pulled back into a low bun. Tanya, Anna's mother, arrived just in time, her eyes darting between her daughter and the stranger, who was now crouching before her. "Anna, oh my God, baby, you can't wander off like that," Tanya said, her voice a mixture of relief and reprimand. She dropped to her knees beside Anna, pulling her into an embrace that seemed to shield her from the world. As Tanya turned to face Sebastian, her face flushed with embarrassment, she murmured an apology. "I'm so sorry," she said, the words tumbling out. "I only turned around for a second." Tanya's eyes, though apologetic, met his with a quiet recognition. "Wait a minute," she said, her brow furrowing. You're the one, aren't you?" Sebastian raised an eyebrow, unsure of what she meant. "The one who helped me that night outside the shelter last December. It was raining. I hadn't eaten in days. You brought me inside, wrapped me in a blanket, and stayed until the ambulance came." Tanya's eyes widened as she remembered. "Oh my God, that was you," she said, her voice filled with both gratitude and surprise. For the first time in the conversation, Sebastian felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't expected this. This wasn't just a random encounter. This was something more. "I never got to thank you," Tanya continued softly, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that caught him off guard. "I never got to thank you for saving my life." Sebastian swallowed hard, his gaze shifting to Anna, who had picked up the teddy bear and was clutching it to her chest. It was a small moment, but one that would change everything. "I'm Sebastian," he said finally, his voice steady. "Sebastian Miller." He reached out to shake Tanya's hand, his grip firm. "And I think I might be the one who needs to thank you?" Tanya glanced at Sebastian, her lips tight as if trying to hold back words that had been locked away for too long. "I'm sorry," she said, breaking the silence. "You probably didn't expect to hear all that from a 7-year-old. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, but Sebastian noticed the exhaustion in her eyes. It wasn't just physical. It was a weight carried through years of struggle, one that neither time nor circumstance could lift. He shook his head, his hand resting lightly on the back of his neck, the same motion he made when grappling with something that didn't fit neatly into the world he had built for himself. "No," he replied, his voice softer than he intended. "I didn't expect that, but I'm glad she said it." He paused, looking up at the sky, the sun hanging low in the distance. It's rare to find someone so young who's already learned how to carry so much. He felt the words before he could stop them, and for a moment he wished he could retract them. But Tanya's eyes softened, and she sighed deeply as though his words had found a place she hadn't realized was still open. "You're right," she said quietly, her voice heavy with the unspoken burden of her own grief. She's been carrying that weight since her father died. She swallowed, and for the first time, Sebastian noticed the faint tremor in her hand. It was small, barely perceptible, but it was there. An involuntary motion, a sign of the cracks that had started to show, despite the years of hard work she'd put into hiding them. She lost him in the most brutal way. Tanya's words hung in the air, each syllable weighted with years of suppressed pain. Marcus worked in construction. He was a good man, hardworking, loyal. He always made sure his team was safe. But that day, Tanya's voice trailed off, the memory too painful to speak. She clenched her fists at her sides, her knuckles whitening as if the act of holding on was the only thing keeping her from unraveling. Sebastian stood still, trying to understand, trying to place himself in her shoes, but the truth was, he couldn't. He had never known that kind of loss. His own childhood had been a carousel of foster homes and the ever-looming shadow of abandonment. He had never known the kind of love Marcus had shared with Tanya, the kind of connection that left a hole so vast, so raw, when it was ripped away. He opened his mouth to speak but found his words stuck somewhere between sympathy and helplessness. "Marcus died in an accident," Tanya continued, her voice tightening as the words left her lips. "The scaffolding collapsed because the company cut corners. They used cheap materials, and he was the one who paid the price. But they didn't care. They just swept it under the rug and called it an accident." She turned to look at him, her eyes filled with a sorrow that was so deep it seemed to absorb all the light around them. And no one, not even the people who should have cared, ever bothered to ask why. Not until now. Sebastian could feel the anger rising in her, the kind of raw, unrefined rage that had been building up for years. It was the kind of anger he had seen in the eyes of countless people over the years. People who had been wronged, people who had fought battles they couldn't win. But Tanya wasn't just angry, she was broken, and that was what terrified him. He had seen the way her face hardened when she spoke of the company that had taken her husband's life. She wasn't just fighting for justice, she was fighting to survive. "I've been through the motions," Tanya went on, her voice barely above a whisper, as though she were telling him the most intimate, painful truth. "I've cried, I've screamed, I've fought to keep it together for Lily. But the truth is, I don't know how to let go of that pain. It's always there, lingering, like a shadow I can't outrun. And every time I look at Lily, I see Marcus. I see him in her smile, in the way she walks, in the way she talks. And I wonder if I can't heal. How is she supposed to?" Her eyes were searching his now, looking for answers she knew he couldn't provide. Sebastian's heart clenched as he listened, his mind racing with thoughts of his own past, the emptiness that had plagued him for years, the loneliness that had settled into his bones. But that was different. He had chosen to be alone. Tanya hadn't. Tanya had lost everything, and in the process, she had built a life for herself and her daughter out of sheer willpower. Sebastian wasn't sure if he could ever understand that kind of resilience, but he couldn't help but admire it. He also couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in his gut, the same one that had been there since he met her, that told him there was more to this story than just loss. There was something here that called to him, something that made him want to help, even though he wasn't sure how. He swallowed hard, his voice barely above a murmur. "Tanya, I don't know what to say. I can't even begin to imagine what you've gone through. But I do know that you're not alone in this. Not anymore." He paused, unsure of what he was offering, unsure of what he even had to give. "I don't know how to fix this, but I'm willing to help, too." Tanya looked at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. And then, with a slight nod, she spoke again, her words soft but firm. "I appreciate that, Sebastian. But this isn't about fixing things. This is about telling the truth, about making sure people like Marcus aren't forgotten, and about making sure Lily grows up knowing that her father mattered, that he didn't die for nothing." Sebastian nodded, his chest tightening. He didn't know what kind of impact he could have on this broken family, but in that moment, he made a silent vow to himself to do whatever it took to help Tanya and Lily. He wasn't sure what that would look like, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was standing at the edge of something meaningful, something worth fighting for. As the days passed, Sebastian couldn't shake the image of Tanya and Anna from his mind. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how deeply their story had impacted him. He was used to dealing with numbers, deadlines, and the cold logic of business. But this was something different. It wasn't just about loss. It was about the raw, unspoken connections between people who had suffered, yet still managed to hold on to the hope that things could be better. He wasn't sure how to help, but he knew one thing. He couldn't just walk away. One evening, Sebastian found himself pacing in his office, staring out at the city lights as the weight of his own loneliness pressed on him harder than usual. He had spent so many years building his empire, but what did it all mean if he couldn't build something real, something that mattered? He thought of Tanya's words, her pain, and the way her eyes had looked at him, full of gratitude, yet still filled with the scars of her past. He knew he couldn't undo the damage that had been done to her family, but he could help in some way. He wasn't sure where to start, but a conversation kept replaying in his mind, the words she had said that day at the children's exhibition. "I don't want toys. I want a dad." He couldn't forget those words, the quiet intensity with which she had spoken them. The sound of his phone ringing broke him from his thoughts. It was Tanya. He picked up immediately, his heart beating faster than usual, as though the call had somehow become a lifeline he hadn't realized he needed. "Sebastian," Tanya's voice came through, calm but hesitant. "I've been thinking, maybe, maybe we could talk about the foundation and what you suggested about helping kids like Anna. It's just—" She paused, her words heavy with an unspoken emotion. "I don't know what I'm doing, but I can't keep carrying all this alone." Sebastian's chest tightened at the sound of her voice. He had wanted to offer her something, some kind of support, but he hadn't known where to begin. Now it seemed like the right moment, and for the first time, he didn't feel like a stranger in someone else's life. "Of course, Tanya," he replied, his voice gentle. "We'll figure this out together. I'll make time to meet. Let's talk about what you need." An hour later, he found himself sitting in a small cafe, waiting for Tanya. The space was quiet, the hum of conversation around him barely reaching his ears. He didn't want to assume anything, but he had a feeling that whatever they were about to discuss would be life-changing. He wasn't just offering charity, he was offering a chance for something bigger, a chance to build something meaningful, a legacy that could make a difference in the lives of children who had lost so much. When Tanya walked in, she was the same as she had been when he first met her, strong, composed. But there was something different now, a softness to her steps, a slight vulnerability that hadn't been there before. She was still wearing the same denim jacket, the one she had worn that day at the exhibition, but today it seemed to hold more significance. She moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the room before landing on him, and for a moment the connection between them felt electric. She was here, ready to take the next step, and so was he. "Hi," Tanya greeted him softly as she slid into the seat across from him. There was a quiet understanding between them now, a recognition of the struggle both had faced, yet neither knew how to put it into words. "I've thought a lot about what you said, about the foundation, and I think it's time to stop just surviving." Her voice was steady, but the flicker of emotion that passed across her face betrayed the depth of what she was feeling. "I want to do something that can help kids like Anna, who are left behind by an accident or a tragedy they had no control over." Tanya took a deep breath, her eyes momentarily clouded with the weight of the past before clearing with determination. "I want to create a scholarship fund," she said, her voice firming. "A fund for children who lose their parents to work-related accidents. Not just a scholarship for education, but something that goes beyond that. Mentorship, emotional support, a path for them to find stability, to heal." She paused, letting the words settle between them. "I want to give them the chance that Anna didn't have, the chance to be more than just the sum of their pain." Sebastian nodded slowly, impressed by her resolve. It was the kind of vision that he hadn't expected, one that went beyond a simple charitable act and into the realm of real, lasting change. I think that's a brilliant idea, Tanya, he said, his voice filled with respect. This could be the start of something incredible. Tanya smiled, though the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I don't know how to do this on my own, though. I've never run a foundation or a program like this. I've spent so much time just trying to get by. I need help to make it real. Sebastian's heart raced as he realized the opportunity that lay before them. This was the moment he had been waiting for. This wasn't just about offering financial support. It was about partnering with Tanya to create something that could change lives. I'm with you, he said, his voice steady and filled with conviction. Whatever you need, I'll be there. We'll build this together. Tanya's eyes softened as she looked at him, her face finally relaxing for the first time in days. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come into our lives. You're not just helping Anna and me, you're giving me the strength to believe that things can get better. Sebastian smiled, a rare warmth spreading through him. I didn't come here to save you, Tanya, he said. You've done all the hard work yourself, but I'll be right here with you as we make this happen. Together. As they sat there, quietly discussing the details of what they would do next, something shifted in the room. For the first time, they both allowed themselves to dream about what the future could hold. Something bigger than themselves. Something that could leave a legacy of hope for children who had lost everything. Tanya wasn't just fighting for Anna anymore. She was fighting for every child who had been forgotten. Every child who needed someone to show them that they mattered. And in that moment, Sebastian realized that he wasn't just helping them. He was helping himself. The weeks following their initial meeting had been a whirlwind of conversations, plans, and proposals. Sebastian found himself more deeply involved than he ever imagined possible, not just in Tanya and Anna's lives, but in the mission they had set out to accomplish. They had begun laying the groundwork for the foundation, discussing everything from scholarship programs to mentorships and emotional support systems. Tanya, despite her initial hesitation, had become a driving force, her determination fueling them both. And yet, as much as they had accomplished together, there was still something unspoken hanging in the air, a question neither of them dared ask. As he stood by the door, waiting for Tanya to answer, his mind wandered back to the days when his world had felt empty. He had often wondered what it meant to truly make a difference in someone's life. But standing there about to enter a space that had become a haven for both Tanya and Anna, he realized that this was where his true work had begun. The work of creating something lasting, something that transcended wealth and power, a legacy, not of success, but of purpose. The door opened, and Tanya appeared in the doorway, her face breaking into a soft smile. There was a warmth to her now that had been absent in their first meeting, a quiet confidence that spoke of healing, of hope. Sebastian, she greeted him, her voice filled with gratitude, but something else, something deeper, something unspoken that lingered between them like a secret. Hi, Tanya, Sebastian replied, smiling as he stepped inside, his heart skipping a beat at the sight of Anna sitting on the floor, coloring, her little face scrunched in concentration. He could see the same determination in her eyes that he had seen in her mother, and it struck him again how rare it was to see such resilience in a child so young. How's the progress going? He asked, trying to keep the conversation casual as he sat down beside Tanya on the couch. Better than expected, Tanya replied, her voice light, but there was a hint of exhaustion beneath it. Anna's been asking a lot of questions about the foundation. She's curious about the kids we'll be helping, and I think she's starting to understand why this matters. As for the details, we're almost ready to start putting everything in place. It's been a lot of work, but it feels like we're finally heading in the right direction. She paused, her gaze shifting to the window as if seeking clarity. But there's one thing that keeps weighing on me. I don't know if I can do this without more support. Her voice faltered slightly, and for a moment, Sebastian saw a side of her that he hadn't expected. A vulnerability, raw and open. Tanya looked at him, her eyes searching his face as though trying to read something hidden beneath his words. After a long pause, she spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. I'm grateful, Sebastian. You've already done so much for us. But I don't want to just accept your help because it's offered. I want to build this foundation the right way. I want to make sure that the children we're helping get the care, the support they deserve. I need you to understand that this is more than just charity for me. It's personal. Sebastian leaned back in the couch, absorbing her words, letting them sink in. He understood now. It wasn't just about the foundation. It wasn't even about helping Anna and Tanya. It was about something much bigger, something that he hadn't fully realized until that moment. He was being asked not just to invest in a cause, but to invest in people, in their future, in their healing. And for the first time, it felt like he was finally doing something that mattered beyond the confines of his business world. Tanya, Sebastian began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, I want you to know that I'm not just offering financial support. I want to help shape this with you. Whatever it takes, I'll be there every step of the way, not just as someone who writes checks, but as someone who is genuinely invested in what we're doing. This isn't about charity, it's about building something real. Her eyes met his, and for the briefest moment, Sebastian saw the flicker of something he couldn't quite name. Hope, trust, maybe both. I don't know how to thank you, she said softly, her voice a little choked, as if the words had been too long in coming. You've already done more than I ever expected. Sebastian smiled, though it was a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. You don't need to thank me, Tanya. You've already done something incredible. You've already given me a purpose that I didn't know I was missing. The conversation drifted into silence as they both sat there, letting the weight of the moment settle between them. It was in that silence that Sebastian realized just how much he had underestimated the power of human connection. The impact of truly caring for someone, of standing beside them when the world seemed too heavy to carry. It wasn't just about the foundation. It was about everything that had led him to this moment, everything he had ignored for so long in favor of success. Tanya stood up, pulling him from his thoughts. There's one more thing, she said, her voice determined again, the weight of her decision clear in her eyes. I've been thinking about this for a while, and I want to ask you something important. Sebastian raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the shift in her tone. What is it? Tanya hesitated for a moment, then looked him directly in the eyes. Will you join me in this, Sebastian? Not just as a partner, but as someone who believes in this as much as I do. Will you help me run this foundation to make sure we're doing things right? Her words hung in the air, a proposal wrapped in trust and hope, a chance to make something more of their connection. Sebastian's heart thudded in his chest. This was it. This was the moment where everything could change. He didn't need to think long. Without hesitation, he answered, his voice steady, clear, and full of commitment. Yes, I'll do it. I'm with you, Tanya. We'll build this together. And in that moment, something clicked. Something deep inside Sebastian shifted, as if a door that had long been closed had been opened, not just to opportunity, but to a future he had never imagined for himself. They had a long road ahead of them, but for the first time, the weight of that journey didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a purpose, something worth fighting for, together. As the weeks went by, Sebastian's visits to Tanya and Anna became a regular occurrence. What began as a professional commitment to a foundation slowly transformed into something more personal, something that touched a part of him he had long neglected. He found himself looking forward to the small moments they shared, the quiet evenings spent discussing logistics for the foundation, the impromptu trips to the park, and even the silent, peaceful mornings when they simply sat together in the living room, each lost in their own thoughts but still sharing the same space. One evening, after yet another productive but exhausting meeting, Sebastian found himself walking toward Tanya's apartment. The path was now familiar to him, and with each step, a growing sense of comfort settled in his chest. He had not expected to feel this way, close to people who had so little in common with his world of luxury and privilege. Tanya's life, the struggles she and Anna had faced, were worlds apart from his usual circle. And yet, with every passing visit, he realized that their world was more real, more grounded than the one he had come from. When he arrived at their apartment, Tanya greeted him with a tired but warm smile. "You're just in time for dinner," she said, her voice laced with a weariness that came from juggling a million things at once. "Anna's been waiting for you. She's made her famous spaghetti again. Sebastian couldn't help but smile at the mention of Anna's spaghetti. The little girl had taken a liking to cooking, and it was one of the few things that made her forget, if only for a moment, the weight of the loss she had endured. The meals they shared weren't just about food, they were about bonding, about creating memories that felt real in the face of everything they had been through. Inside, Anna was already setting the table, her tiny hands carefully arranging plates and silverware, her face lit with a smile as she spotted Sebastian entering. "Mr. Sebastian," she exclaimed, her voice bright, "I made extra spaghetti just for you. It's the best." Sebastian chuckled, bending down to her level. "I can't wait to try it, Anna. You're becoming quite the chef." He ruffled her hair, and she beamed, clearly proud of her accomplishments in the kitchen. As they sat down to eat, the conversation flowed easily, but there was a quiet undercurrent, a sense of understanding between them. Tanya, although still visibly tired, had a lightness in her that Sebastian hadn't seen before. She seemed at peace in a way that made him realize just how much she had grown since their first meeting. The next few weeks were filled with more visits and deeper conversations. They discussed the foundation in more detail, ironed out the finer points of the mentorship programs, and planned the launch event. But beneath the professional facade, something else was slowly growing, something deeper, something neither of them had planned, but both had come to realize. Tanya had begun to trust him, not just as a benefactor, but as someone who genuinely cared for their well-being. And Sebastian, who had once been all too willing to keep his emotional distance, found himself becoming more attached, more invested in their success than he had ever been in his business ventures. One afternoon, after a particularly long meeting with potential donors, Sebastian stopped by Tanya's apartment on a whim. He didn't have any formal reason for visiting, no paperwork to deliver or decisions to make. He simply wanted to see how they were doing, to check in on their progress, and on them. When he arrived, he found Tanya sitting on the couch, her hands curled around a mug of tea, her eyes distant. It was one of those rare moments when she was not the strong, determined woman he had come to know, but instead, a person lost in thought, weighed down by the enormity of it all. "Hey," Sebastian said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Everything okay?" Tanya looked up, surprised by his presence, but there was a smile on her face, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, just tired," she said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "It's a lot to handle, you know? The foundation, the kids we're helping, Anna's school. Some days it just feels like too much." Sebastian sat down beside her, his presence a steady anchor in the sea of her thoughts. "I know it's hard," he said, his voice sincere, "but you don't have to do it all by yourself. You have me, and we're building something real here, together." Tanya didn't say anything for a moment, but he could see the shift in her. It wasn't a dramatic change, but there was a slight softening in her posture, a release of tension she had been carrying. "I'm grateful, Sebastian," she finally said, her voice quiet. "More than you know." He wanted to say something more, something to reassure her, but the words didn't come. Instead, he simply placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of solidarity, of understanding. He had never been good at expressing emotions, but in that moment, he didn't need to. They both knew the depth of what they were sharing. In the weeks that followed, Sebastian continued to visit, sometimes on business, but often just to check in. He began to spend more time with Anna, helping her with her homework, listening to her stories about school and her dreams of dancing. Tanya had become more comfortable opening up to him about her fears and hopes for the future. And in return, Sebastian found himself revealing more about his own life, his childhood, his struggles, and the loneliness he had long buried beneath the surface of his success. Each visit seemed to bring them closer, and with every passing day, Sebastian realized that he wasn't just helping them build a foundation, he was building something far more important, a bond. A bond that, in time, would prove to be stronger than anything he had ever known. Sebastian had asked her about Marcus more than once, gently probing, trying to understand the pain she still carried with her. But Tanya never truly spoke of him, not in the way she wanted to. The truth was, the pain of losing Marcus was something she had hidden away, something she carried in the quiet corners of her heart. It was easier to keep it there, buried beneath the layers of her new life. beneath the joy of watching Anna grow, beneath the responsibilities of building a future for them both. But every now and then, the past came rushing back, and today it came with a force that left her breathless. She closed her eyes and leaned back in her chair, the sound of the kettle boiling in the background. She could almost feel Marcus beside her, could almost hear his voice calling her name, his laugh, the way he would always ask about her day and hold her close at night. Marcus had been more than just a husband. He had been her rock, her constant in a world that often felt like it was spinning out of control. The memory of his death still haunted her, as it always would. It had come without warning, a sudden and devastating phone call that shattered her world. It was a work-related accident, they told her, a freak accident. The scaffolding he had been working on had collapsed, and despite the efforts of his co-workers to save him, he hadn't made it. Tanya had been left to pick up the pieces, to raise Anna alone, to navigate a life that no longer felt whole. As she sat there, her mind wandered back to the day she had received the call, the day that had turned her world upside down. It had been a morning like any other. Anna was at school, Marcus was off to work. They had kissed each other goodbye, like they always did, neither of them knowing it would be the last time. Tanya had gone about her day, not thinking that the phone call she was about to receive would change everything. She had been sitting on the couch, scrolling through her emails when the phone rang. The voice on the other end had been calm, too calm, and that was when she knew something was wrong. "Mrs. Carter?" the voice had asked. "I'm afraid we have some bad news." Tanya's heart had dropped into her stomach as she stood up, her legs suddenly weak. "What happened?" she had asked, her voice trembling. "There's been an accident at the construction site," the voice explained. "Marcus was involved in a scaffolding collapse. We're doing everything we can, but he didn't make it." The words had blurred together, the world around her spinning as if she were trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She had dropped the phone, unable to comprehend what she had just heard. How could this be happening? How could Marcus, the man she loved, be gone in an instant? How could Anna grow up without her father? The questions had flooded her mind, and for the first time in her life, she had felt truly lost. The days that followed were a blur. She had been surrounded by well-meaning friends and family, people who offered their condolences and their support, but it all felt hollow. How could anyone understand the depth of her grief? How could anyone understand the pain of losing a partner, a father, a friend? Tanya had been left to navigate the overwhelming sense of loss on her own, to pick up the shattered pieces of her life and try to make something out of the wreckage. And now, sitting in the quiet of her apartment, Tanya couldn't escape the memories. Marcus's death had changed her in ways she wasn't ready to admit. It had made her strong, but it had also made her fearful. Fearful of losing anyone else she loved. Fearful of building anything too close to her heart. She had spent so many years bearing the pain, pretending it wasn't there. But now, as she thought of Marcus and the life they had shared, she felt the weight of it all crash down on her once again. The kettle whistled, breaking her thoughts. Tanya stood up and poured herself another cup of tea, the warm liquid offering a small comfort. As she sipped it, her thoughts drifted back to Marcus's death, to the moments that had followed. She had gone to the hospital, to the morgue, had seen his body and held his hand one last time. It had been so surreal, so painfully final. She had kissed him goodbye, knowing in her heart that it would be the last time. The funeral had been a blur as well, a sea of faces she barely recognized, all offering their condolences, their sympathy, but all she had wanted was to wake up from the nightmare, to have Marcus back. The emptiness that had settled in her chest was a weight she hadn't been prepared for. It had been overwhelming, suffocating, and yet she had no choice but to carry it. There was no time to grieve, not with Anna needing her, not with everything that had to be done. As Tanya sat back down at the table, her hands trembling slightly, she realized how much she had buried over the years. She had been so focused on moving forward, on building a future for herself and Anna, that she had never fully allowed herself to mourn Marcus. It was easier to hide behind the responsibilities, to put on a brave face, but the truth was, Marcus's death had left a scar on her soul, one she couldn't heal no matter how much time passed. The memories of Marcus, the pain of his loss, had been a constant companion in her life, and she wasn't sure she was ready to let them go. But as Sebastian's visits grew more frequent, as the bond between them deepened, Tanya realized that perhaps, just perhaps, she didn't have to face it all alone. And maybe, just maybe, the future they were building together could be the healing she so desperately needed. But that, too, was something she would have to face in time. For now, she simply had to sit with the memories, with the pain, and with the truth that she could never escape the impact Marcus had left on her life. The meeting room buzzed with a low hum of voices as Sebastian watched the diverse group of donors, mentors, and board members shuffle into their seats. The grand chandelier above seemed to sparkle with an unspoken promise, its warm glow illuminating the seriousness of the moment. It was a pivotal day, a day that would mark the beginning of something that could change the lives of countless children who had suffered unimaginable losses, much like Anna had. The launch of the Miller Legacy Foundation was not just a professional milestone for Sebastian, it was deeply personal. Tanya had been at his side every step of the way, her presence calming, her strength unwavering as they worked tirelessly to establish the foundation. At first it had been a dream, something born from their late-night conversations, from the shared understanding of what it meant to lose someone, to be left behind. They had spoken about it in hushed tones, unsure if anyone would take them seriously, unsure if they could create something powerful enough to honor Marcus's memory. But now, after months of hard work, meetings, and countless late nights, the dream had become a reality. Today is about legacy, Sebastian said, his voice firm and steady, as he stood at the head of the long wooden table, facing the room full of eager faces. Not just the legacy of Marcus Miller, but the legacy we will build for all the children who have lost their parents. This foundation will give them more than just financial aid. It will provide them with mentorship, emotional support, and a pathway to a brighter future. His eyes briefly flickered to Tanya, sitting in the front row, her posture straight, but her eyes soft as she looked up at him. She had always been the driving force behind this initiative. Her determination, fueled by her love for Marcus and her unrelenting desire to help children like Anna, had turned a simple idea into something tangible, something that would last. The room was quiet for a moment, the weight of his words settling in, before a woman in the back raised her hand. "Sebastian," she began, her voice cutting through the silence, "how do you plan to ensure that the foundation remains focused on its core mission? That it doesn't lose sight of the families it's meant to serve?" Tanya smiled at the mention of her name, but there was a quiet sadness in her eyes. She hadn't expected the foundation to become this much of a personal mission, but she had found herself giving more and more of her time to it, building a legacy not only for Marcus but for their daughter, for all the children who had lost someone they loved. Her hands clenched around the edges of the notebook she had been jotting down notes in, but her expression remained composed. She had grown used to the pressure, to the weight of responsibility. What she hadn't grown used to, however, was the emotional toll it took on her. Every time she sat in a meeting like this, every time she saw Sebastian's determination mirrored in the faces of the board members, she felt the absence of Marcus more deeply. But she had learned to push the grief aside, at least for now. There was no time for weakness. The children needed her, and she wasn't about to let them down. As the meeting continued, plans for scholarships, mentorship programs, and a network of support systems were laid out. Sebastian and Tanya spoke of their vision for the future, a foundation that would not only provide financial assistance to children who had lost their parents, but also offer them a sense of community, a place where they could heal and grow. They envisioned a world where no child would ever feel alone, a world where children like Anna could feel the support they needed to succeed, to thrive. Tanya's voice was steady as she spoke of the emotional side of the foundation. "We need to do more than provide scholarships," she said, her gaze focused on the board members. "We need to make sure these children don't fall through the cracks. We need to help them process their grief, to show them that their pain doesn't have to define them. There are so many children out there who are lost, who feel abandoned. We can't just give them money and call it a day. We have to give them hope." Sebastian looked at her, his heart swelling with pride. He had always known that Tanya was the heart of the foundation, that her strength was what made it truly special. Her words were a reminder of why they were doing this, why they had to keep pushing forward, no matter how difficult it became. After the meeting, as the room emptied and the energy shifted from professional to personal, Tanya lingered by the door, watching the board members and donors chat among themselves. It was a rare moment of peace, a chance for her to reflect on how far they had come. She felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to find Sebastian standing beside her. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it." Tanya gave him a small smile, but the emotions were too much to contain. The tears welled up in her eyes and she quickly blinked them away. She hadn't realized how much the launch had meant to her until this very moment. This was more than just a foundation. It was a promise, a way for Marcus to live on, for his legacy to endure. It was a way for their daughter to see that even in the darkest times, something beautiful could be born. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I couldn't have done this without you." Sebastian smiled, a warmth in his eyes. "You don't have to thank me. You're the reason this is happening. Without you, there would be no foundation." They stood there in the quiet of the room, side by side, both silently acknowledging the bond that had grown between them. It was a bond forged in loss, in pain, but also in hope. And as they watched the last of the board members file out of the room, they both knew that this was just the beginning. The Miller Legacy Foundation would change lives, and they would be there every step of the way to ensure that the children who needed it most would never feel alone again. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, obstacles, and heartbreak, but they had created something real, something lasting. And for the first time in a long while, Tanya allowed herself to believe that just maybe the future held something good, something worth fighting for. Sebastian turned to her, his expression a mixture of determination and concern. "Tanya, are you ready for this?" His voice was steady, but there was an edge of uncertainty hidden beneath his calm exterior. This wasn't just about the foundation anymore. This was personal. This was about exposing the truth about Marcus's death, about the corruption that had caused it, and about the powerful man who had tried to sweep it all under the rug. Tanya nodded slowly, her jaw tight. "I have no choice, do I?" she replied, her voice low but resolute. "I can't let Marcus's death be forgotten. Not like this." She turned to face him, her eyes clear, though her heart raced in her chest. "We've worked too hard to get here. We can't let them win." Sebastian gave her a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "No, we won't let them. But you need to stay strong, Tanya. This is going to get ugly. They'll try to discredit you, try to twist everything you say." "I know," she said, her fingers trembling as she adjusted the hem of her blouse. "I'm not afraid of them. I'm afraid of what happens if we don't do this. If we don't fight now, everything Marcus stood for, everything he worked for, it will all be buried." The door to the conference room opened, and a young assistant stepped in, signaling that it was time. Tanya took a deep breath and stood up straight, her back a little stiffer than usual. As she followed Sebastian into the bright lights of the press room, she could feel the eyes of the world on her. The journalists sat in neat rows, their cameras flashing as they prepared to capture every word she would say. It felt as though the room was closing in on her, but she squared her shoulders and focused on the task at hand. This wasn't about her. It wasn't about the cameras or the reporters. This was about truth, and it was the only thing that mattered. Sebastian stood beside her at the podium, his hand resting lightly on the microphone as he addressed the crowd. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, his voice commanding, though tinged with the tension that hung in the air. "We are here not just to speak about the Miller Legacy Foundation, but about something far more important. We are here to address the truth behind the tragic and preventable death of Marcus Miller." But then Sebastian turned to her, giving her a silent cue, and Tanya stepped forward. Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs as she took the microphone, her hands gripping it tightly to steady herself. "I loved Marcus," she began, her voice wavering only slightly as she spoke. "He was a good man, a hard-working man who cared deeply about his job, about the people he worked with, about his family. And when he died, it wasn't just a tragedy, it was a betrayal." The words felt heavy, as if each one carried the weight of years of unspoken grief. Tanya paused, collecting herself before she continued. The company that was responsible for his death has tried to cover it up, to silence anyone who dares to speak the truth. But I won't be silenced. I can't be. Not when children like Anna are growing up in a world where justice is for sale, where the rich and powerful can erase a man's life because they don't want to face the consequences of their actions. As she spoke, the room grew still. The reporters exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Tanya's words rang with an undeniable conviction, and despite the doubt that hung in the air, she could feel the shift. She could feel the moment when the truth began to take hold. It wasn't just her words that were speaking, it was her heart, her pain, her unrelenting drive to make sure that Marcus's death wasn't in vain. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the back of the room, cutting through the silence like a knife. Do you have proof? Can you prove what you're saying is true? The question echoed in Tanya's mind. For a moment she faltered, her breath catching in her throat. What if they didn't believe her? What if all of this, everything she had worked for, collapsed under the weight of doubt? But then she remembered Marcus, remembered the promise she had made to him, to Anna, to herself. Yes, she said, her voice stronger now, more resolute than before. We have the evidence. We have the emails, the reports, the testimony of the whistleblower who exposed the cover-up, and we have the truth. Tanya's words hung in the air, and she could feel the eyes of the reporters on her, their skepticism beginning to melt away. She had said the one thing that could not be ignored, the truth. We won't stop, she added, not until justice is served. As she finished speaking, the room erupted into chaos, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, the weight of the moment crashing over her like a tidal wave. She knew it wasn't over, that this battle was only just beginning. But for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't felt since Marcus died. Hope. The truth was out. The world would know what had happened, and maybe, just maybe, it would change everything. Sebastian stepped in, taking control of the room as the reporters scrambled to get answers. He answered questions with precision, his voice calm, yet unyielding. But Tanya's mind was elsewhere, her thoughts consumed with the truth they had just unleashed. This was only the beginning, and as she stood there, fighting for the justice Marcus deserved, she realized that they were about to change the world, one truth at a time. As the press conference came to a close, Tanya felt a weight lift from her shoulders, but there was no celebration. The battle had just begun, and she knew that Victor Kane would not give up without a fight. But Tanya was ready. She had nothing left to lose but the truth, and she wasn't about to back down. David stood at the edge of the memorial plaza, his eyes scanning the sea of faces gathered before him. The ceremony was supposed to mark the culmination of a long journey, but as he looked at Maya, he could feel the weight of the moment pressing in. It wasn't just about honoring the past. It was about shaping a future. The plaques on the wall, each engraved with the names of workers lost to neglect, stood as stark reminders of the fragility of life, but also of the indomitable spirit that had fought to keep their memories alive. As Maya stepped forward to speak, her presence radiated strength. She had become more than a symbol of resilience. She had become the voice of the silenced. Her journey, their journey, had brought them here. It was a victory, but not in the traditional sense. It was a victory for the unseen, the unheard, and for the families who had suffered in silence for too long. Maya cleared her throat, her voice steady as she began. We stand here today not just to remember, but to ensure that these names, these lives, are never forgotten. My husband Marcus and all the others who perished in silence deserve to be remembered for the people they were. People who gave their lives for a cause greater than themselves. But today, we are not just honoring their memory. We are ensuring that their stories are told, their families supported, and their deaths are not in vain. David's heart swelled with pride as he watched her, every word she spoke carrying the weight of their shared history. This was the legacy they had built together, a foundation that would continue to support those who had been left behind. After the ceremony, as the crowd slowly dispersed, Maya and David found a quiet moment together. The wind had picked up, and the chill in the air contrasted sharply with the warmth of the sun, casting a golden glow over the memorial. Maya's eyes, filled with tears, yet resolute, met David's. I never thought I'd be standing here, David. Not like this. I thought, I thought I'd be alone forever, carrying this burden by myself. But now I feel like I'm not alone. And Marcus, he's with us. He's part of this. David reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. You were never alone, Maya. You just needed to believe it. And now together, we've built something that will outlast us all. Maya nodded, her grip tightening as she looked at the names on the memorial wall, her heart full of both sorrow and hope. Their lives had changed in ways neither of them had anticipated. The Carter Foundation was thriving, and with it, the promise of a better future for countless families who had suffered similar losses. It wasn't just about scholarships and financial aid. It was about providing a support system, a network of people who understood the pain of losing a loved one to an unjust cause. David's role as a Millionaire CEO had shifted. He wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was a man who had found his purpose in something much larger than himself. He had learned that true power wasn't in wealth or influence, but in the ability to make a real difference in someone's life. Maya, too, had found a new sense of purpose. She had become not just a leader, but a symbol of strength for the women and children who sought solace and guidance from the foundation. She had risen from the ashes of her past, and with each passing day, she felt more connected to the world around her. She had found a community that accepted her for who she was, not just as Marcus's widow, but as Maya, a woman with a voice and a mission. And Anna, the little girl who had started it all, had blossomed into a confident, curious young girl, her laughter now filling the house instead of silence. She was thriving in ways that Maya had never imagined possible. And the future, once clouded with uncertainty, now seemed full of endless possibilities. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity for the foundation. New initiatives were launched, and the support for families affected by workplace tragedies grew stronger with each passing day. David and Maya worked tirelessly, attending meetings, advocating for change, and raising awareness about the issues that had once been so personal to them. They knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were ready for it. Together, they had built something that couldn't be undone, something that would continue to grow long after they were gone. Anna, now a vibrant young girl, continued to excel in school and at ballet, her dreams growing larger with each passing day. She was no longer the shy, quiet girl who had once wished for a father figure. She had found a family, a community, and a sense of belonging. And though Marcus wasn't there to see it, Maya knew he would have been proud of the young woman Anna was becoming. She often found herself reflecting on how much their lives had changed, how much love and loss had shaped them into the people they were now. She had learned that healing wasn't linear, that it didn't happen all at once. It was a journey, one that took time, patience, and the willingness to face the truth, even when it hurt. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Anna curled up beside them. Maya couldn't help but feel a deep sense of peace. They had come so far, and while the scars of the past would never completely fade, they had found something more important, a new beginning. I think we're finally home, Maya said softly, her voice filled with contentment. David smiled, wrapping his arm around her. We are, he replied, and we'll never stop fighting for what's right. As they looked out the window, the night sky stretching out before them, they knew that the work was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, they felt hopeful. They had created a legacy that would live on through the foundation, through the lives they had touched, and through the love they had shared. And that, more than anything, was the greatest gift of all. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of resilience, truth, and the fight for justice. We hope this story has left you reflecting on the power of standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the journey of Tanya and Sebastian and how their courage resonates with you. Please share your reflections in the comments below. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter. Thank you once again for your support, and we look forward to having you with us next time.